The first thing she said to me was not good morning. Love, hey, Caleb, not can we talk for a second? It was your fence is illegal and you have until Friday to remove it or the fines start at $200 a day. That was how Evelyn Mercer Blake introduced herself to my driveway on a cold Tuesday in October, standing there in pearl earrings and gardening gloves, holding a clipboard like it was a court order, and looking at my 6-foot cedar fence like it had personally insulted her family bloodline. Now I had measured that fence myself, not once, not twice, but with a laser level because I am the kind of man who does not eyeball something when a tool exists to do the job right, and the tallest post came in at 71 3/4 inches, which meant it was under the limit. But Evelyn did not come there for measurements. She came there for obedience. I asked her, real calm, if I could see the measurement she was using, and she gave me that tight little smile people give when they've already decided you are beneath the conversation. She said the Homeowners Association had conducted an assessment. I said, who conducted it? She said that was board information. I said the house 2 doors down from yours has an 8-foot fence that has been standing there since 2020, and I pointed right at it, because you could see the top of that thing from half the county. Evelyn did not even turn her head. She just tapped her clipboard with one finger and said, that property is not your concern, Mr. Walker. And I remember right then, with the smell of wet leaves coming off the ditch and my coffee going cold on the porch rail behind me, thinking, well, Mom, you just made it my concern. My name is Caleb Walker. I live outside a little place called Briar Glen, Pennsylvania, in a neighborhood called Ashford Oaks, which sounds a lot richer than it is, at least on my end of the road. I am a second-generation plumber, third if you count my granddad, who fixed half the farmhouses in Mercer County with a pipe wrench, a roll of solder, and enough stubbornness to keep a mule embarrassed. I did not grow up with money. I grew up in a rented ranch house with baseboard heat that popped all winter and a mother who could stretch one pot roast into 3 dinners and make you feel lucky for every one of them. My father worked for a mechanical contractor for 28 years, and when his knees finally gave out, the company gave him a handshake, a fruit basket, and a phone number for disability forms. I was 16 when I watched him sit at the kitchen table pretending not to cry over a stack of medical bills, and I made myself a promise so quiet I do not think I even said it out loud. Nobody gets to push me off something I built. So I worked. I worked service calls in basements with spiders the size of bottle caps, crawl spaces that smelled like old mud and mouse traps, apartment renovations where the tenants hated you before you even knocked, and I saved until saving became its own kind of religion. By 34, I bought 1.6 acres on the west edge of Ashford Oaks, right where Laurel Pike bends toward the ridge. The place was ugly when I got it. No use pretending otherwise. The back half was weeds. The old shed leaned like it had given up on life, and the driveway looked like somebody had pulled gravel from a moving truck. But it had good bones, clean well water, a view across the valley, and enough room that a man could breathe without hearing his neighbor sneeze. I built most of the house myself. I hired out the foundation and the roof trusses, because pride is one thing and stupidity is another. But the plumbing, the trim, the deck, the cedar fence along the south side, that was me. Weekends, evenings, holidays, with country radio playing from an old job site speaker and my dog Earl sleeping in the sawdust like he was supervising. That fence was not some decorative afterthought. It was the line between the life I'd crawled out of and the one I had finally earned. Now, Ashford Oaks had an HOA, and I knew that when I bought in. I read the rules before closing because I have been around enough contracts to know the poison is never in the headline. It is always in the paragraph nobody wants to read. The fence rule said no solid privacy barrier could exceed 6 feet measured from finished grade. Fine, I stayed under it. But what I did not pay much attention to back then was Evelyn Mercer Blake, president of the Ashford Oaks Community Association for 12 years, self-appointed guardian of mailbox colors, porch flags, shrub heights, and apparently the moral condition of anybody whose truck had ladder racks. Evelyn lived across Laurel Pike from my south corner, in a brick colonial with black shutters and 2 stone lions out front, because nothing says welcoming community like concrete predators guarding your driveway. She had a little white utility cart with the HOA seal on the side, and she drove it slow, like a patrol car, stopping in front of houses long enough for curtains to move. At first I thought she was just one of those people who needed a hobby and accidentally chose power. But after a few months, I noticed her hobby had a pattern. The retired machinist 3 houses west got fined for a camper cover. The young couple from Kentucky got fined for a raised garden bed. Mrs. Alvarez, who lived alone and worked nights at the hospital, got a warning because her trash cans were visible for maybe 6 hours too long after pickup. But the east side of Laurel Pike, Evelyn's side, could apparently leave boat trailers, vinyl fences, decorative fountains, and one truly hideous fake wishing well in plain sight with no consequences at all. I knew it, my neighbors knew it, but everybody had learned to grumble in private and pay in public, because fighting an HOA feels a lot like arguing with a parking meter. Then she came for my fence. I could have paid the fine. I could have shaved an inch off the posts, cursed her name in the garage, and moved on with my life. That is what she expected. That is what women like Evelyn count on. Not because they are strong, but because they are exhausting. And most people will pay a ridiculous amount of money just to make an exhausting person go away. But something about the way she said the property is not your concern got under my skin and stayed there. It sounded too much like every foreman who ever told my dad not to ask questions. Every bank officer who looked at my calloused hands before deciding how much respect I deserved. Every clean shirt and every quiet office who mistakes paperwork for character. So that night, I sat at my kitchen table with the HOA packet, a legal pad, and a mug of coffee that turned cold before I touched half of it. Earl snored under the chair. Rain ticked against the window. I read the fence section again, slow this time, word by word, and there it was, hiding in plain sight like a loose pipe behind drywall. No solid privacy barrier, solid not structure, not wall, not enclosure, solid. I kept reading. And 2 pages later, I found an old architectural exemption from 1991, probably written by some developer who wanted a glass sunroom and did not want anyone telling him no. Transparent or semi-transparent structures, it said, were exempt from height limitations pending review of structural safety documentation. Not aesthetic approval, not board discretion. Safety documentation. I leaned back in that chair and laughed so hard, Earl woke up and looked at me like I'd finally cracked. The next morning, I called my cousin Nolan, who had spent 6 years working as a clerk for a real estate attorney before deciding law offices made him hate daylight. I read him the language. There was a pause. Then he said, "Caleb, do you understand what this means?" I said, "I think it means my fence is legal." He said, "No, your fence is boring. This means you could build a transparent wall tall enough for Evelyn to see from heaven, and if an engineer stamps it, they have a problem." I looked out the kitchen window toward that cedar fence, toward Evelyn's house beyond it, her white cart parked neatly beside the garage like a toy tank. And for the first time since she walked up my driveway, I did not feel angry. I felt focused. And that, as it turned out, was much more dangerous. I did not write Evelyn back that night, because angry letters feel good for about 9 minutes and then spend the rest of your life looking stupid in court. I waited until morning, made coffee, fed Earl, measured the fence again in daylight, took photos with the laser level visible in every shot, then wrote the driest, most polite letter I have ever written in my life. I stated that my cedar privacy fence measured 71 3/4 inches at the highest point, below the 6-foot maximum, that the association had provided no verifiable measurement, no measuring method, and no independent documentation, and that I was requesting immediate withdrawal of the violation notice. I attached photos, my original survey, and a copy of the rule with the word solid highlighted so gently it almost felt rude. Then I hand-delivered one copy to the HOA Dropbox, mailed another certified, and kept a third in a folder labeled Evelyn, because sometimes a man needs a folder with a villain name on it. 8 days later, her response arrived. She did not withdraw anything. She changed the charge. Now my fence was not too tall. It was visually disruptive and inconsistent with the character of Ashford Oaks. I stood in my kitchen reading that phrase while looking out at a cedar fence in a neighborhood full of cedar fences, pine fences, white vinyl fences, aluminum pool fences, one chain-link dog run, and Evelyn's own stone lions guarding the driveway like she was expecting a medieval siege. Visual disruption, I said out loud, and Earl thumped his tail once, like even he had doubts. Nolan told me not to answer yet. He said, before you argue about fairness, find out if fairness ever lived there in the first place. So I filed a public records request with Briar Glen Township for every HOA-related complaint, violation notice, board communication, architectural approval, and fence dispute submitted in the last 6 years. It cost me $18 and almost a month of waiting. And when the clerk finally calls, she said, "Mr. Walker, You may want to bring a box. And that was the first time I realized this thing was bigger than my fence. The records filled 2 banker boxes, and I spent 3 evenings at my kitchen table sorting them into piles while rain came down hard enough to turn my driveway into soup. By the second night, the pattern was not just obvious. It was embarrassing. Every single fence notice, every shed notice, every visible trash can warning, every driveway basketball hoop complaint, every work truck warning, all of them clustered on the west side of Laurel Pike, the side with smaller lots, older houses, tradespeople, retirees, widows, young families, and folks who couldn't have afforded to hire lawyers over a mailbox post. Meanwhile, Evelyn's side of the road had unapproved additions, fences over height, trailers parked in side yards, a pergola that looked like it had been built during a windstorm, and not one fine. Not one. I took photos from public sidewalks. I wrote dates, addresses, measurements, rule sections. I did not trespass. I did not sneak around at midnight. I did everything in broad daylight because daylight is very inconvenient for people who prefer shadows. The most ridiculous one was a black stockade fence 4 houses east of Evelyn, 8 feet tall if it was, an inch, built right on the corner, where everyone could see it, approved without notes, no safety review, no height variance, no problem. That night I called Nolan and said, she has been using the rules like a flashlight, only shining them where she wants people to feel small. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Caleb, selective enforcement is not just ugly, it is useful. I asked, useful how? He said, because boards can get away with being petty until somebody makes their pettiness measurable, and now you have numbers. That was when the glass wall stopped being a joke and became a plan. I called 3 commercial glazing companies, and 2 of them thought I was either confused or insane, which was fair. The third one sent out a man named Russell Keene, owner of Keene Architectural Glass, a big, calm fellow with silver hair, work boots cleaner than mine, and the expression of somebody who had seen rich people request much stranger things. I walked him along the south property line and explained what I wanted. 72 feet of transparent structural glass, 14 feet tall, set in a powder-coated steel frame, engineered footers, no tint, no advertising, no lettering, nothing but glass and light. Russell stared across the road at Evelyn's house, then back at me. He said, "You trying to block a view with something people can see through?" I said, "No, sir, I'm trying to improve one." He smiled a little at that. Then I showed him the county zoning map, because here is the part Evelyn did not know. The south corner of my parcel had an old residential commercial overlay from a failed plan in the late 90s to turn Laurel Pike into a small business corridor. The corridor never happened, but the overlay stayed, and under township code, I could operate a limited studio or workshop there, provided the structure met setbacks, parking, and noise requirements. I'd been using that corner for nothing but weeds and old lumber. Now I was looking at it like a bank account nobody told me I had. The idea came together standing there in the cold with Russell, Earl sniffing at a fence post, and Evelyn's curtains moving across the road like the house itself was spying. The glass wall would be the exterior wall of a small light studio, 26 by 30 feet, polished concrete floor, radiant heat, a sloped roof with north windows, enough space for a photographer, architect, painter, or small design office. The ridge beyond Laurel Pike would pour light through the glass all afternoon. From the road, it would look intentional, expensive, architectural. From Evelyn's kitchen, it would look like the consequence of bothering the wrong plumber. Russell gave me a rough number that made my stomach tighten. Somewhere around $170,000 for the wall, studio shell, footers, permits, and site work. I will not pretend I did not almost choke. That is real money. That is money with weight on it. But then I ran the numbers. Studio rent in our county for good natural light space was $1,200 to $1,600 a month, and the property value increase could be significant. I had savings credit, and a small line against my business equipment I had never touched. Was it risky? Yes. Was it financially stupid? Not if I did it right. Was there a small private part of me that wanted Evelyn to drink her morning tea while staring at a 14-foot legal lesson in humility? Also, yes, human beings are complicated. I submitted the building permit on a Thursday, and the township clerk, a woman named Marcy with reading glasses on a chain, flipped through the application twice before looking up at me. "Structural transparent wall," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Studio use." "Yes, ma'am." "Laurel Pike, south corner." "Yes, ma'am." Across from Mrs. Blake, I paused just long enough to be honest without being helpful. It is across the road, yes? Marcy stamped the application received and said the review would take 6 to 8 weeks. As I turned to leave, I heard her mutter to another clerk, "Well, that road finally found its entertainment. The township notified the HOA, of course." And Evelyn reacted like I had applied to open a fireworks factory beside a church nursery. She called an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse, which was really just a converted sales office with beige carpet and a coffee maker that smelt permanently burnt. I showed up early with folders for every board member and a box of donuts, because my father used to say, if you are going to make people uncomfortable, at least feed them first. Evelyn sat at the front table with her vice president Martin Shaw, who had the personality of a wet receipt, and a newer board member named Ne Liu, a civil engineer who had moved in the previous spring and seemed to be quietly regretting every decision that placed her in that room. Evelyn opened with photographs of my proposed site, my existing fence, and a dramatic statement about neighborhood integrity, architectural chaos, and the dangerous precedent of allowing homeowners to weaponize loopholes. I let her talk. There is a special kind of gift in letting a person overstate their case in public. When she finished, I stood and said, "I appreciate the board's concern." Then I handed out copies of the transparent structure exemption, the zoning overlay, the preliminary engineering letter from Russell, and the enforcement map I had made from township records. I said, "The association may review structural safety documentation, and I will provide it. The association may not reject a transparent structure based on height when its own governing documents exempt transparent structures from height limitations. Also, before any further enforcement action is taken against me or any West Side homeowner, I believe the board should review the attached 6-year enforcement pattern." Dana Liu looked down at the map. Martin Shaw looked like he wished the carpet would swallow him. Evelyn looked at me with a kind of cold disbelief, as if the furniture had started quoting case law. She said, "Mr. Walker, this board will not be intimidated by stacks of paper." I said respectfully, "Mrs. Blake, stacks of paper are how you find people for 12 years. I just brought my own." Nobody laughed out loud, but I saw Dana press her lips together, and that was enough. The permit came through in early December with one condition: final stamped engineering on the footers and wind load. Russell handled it. Everything was overbuilt. Every beam, every anchor, every panel, because I wanted no loose screw for Evelyn to hang a complaint on. But while that was moving, Nolan found the thing that changed the whole weather of the fight. He pulled the original subdivision plat from the county archives and compared it to the current property lines. Then he called me before breakfast, which Nolan does only for emergencies, deaths, and excellent gossip. He said, "Caleb, those stone lions at Evelyn's driveway, are they as ugly in person as they are on satellite view?" I said, "Worse." He said, "Good, because they are sitting 20 inches into the common easement." I looked out my window toward her house and actually had to sit down. The original Ashford Oaks plat reserved a 12-foot common easement along Laurel Pike for drainage, sidewalks, and utilities. Evelyn's 2 stone lions, installed in 2017 without a recorded variance, were not just close to that easement. They were in it, both of them. Big gray symbols of authority squatting on land she did not own. The HOA rules were very clear about unauthorized structures in common areas. Remove them within 30 days, or the association could remove them and bill the owner. I hired a licensed surveyor, paid $700, and got a stamped confirmation. Then Nolan drafted a formal notice to the board, not to Evelyn personally, requesting enforcement under the same rules she had spent years applying to everyone else. I mailed it certified on Friday afternoon. Monday morning, Russell called to say the glass panels had been ordered, and by Tuesday, Evelyn's curtains were closed for the first time since I moved in. The first morning the glass went up, the whole south end of Laurel Pike looked different. Not loud exactly, not flashy, but awake, like somebody had opened a window in the middle of winter and let the sun prove a point. Russell and his crew worked for 8 days, setting steel posts into engineered footers, lifting those massive transparent panels into place with suction rigs, tightening bolts, checking plumb lines, wiping fingerprints off the glass until it caught the sky clean. I stood there more than I worked, which bothered me because I am not built for standing around. But there are moments in a man's life when the thing he imagined in anger becomes real in daylight, and he has to take a second to understand what he has done. By the time they finished, the wall stood 72 feet long and 14 feet tall, bronze framed, clear as creek water. strong enough for a commercial storefront and perfectly legal. Behind it, the studio was almost done. Warm concrete floor, fresh drywall, high windows, and that wide-open view of the ridge. Across the road, Evelyn's curtains stayed shut until noon. Then, right before lunch, I saw one white sliver move. I know she looked. I would have looked too. Her first complaint came before the final inspection sticker had even cooled on the glass. She called the township and claimed the wall was actually a commercial sign, because, in her words, it created a billboard-like visual impact. Marcy from the township called me with the tired voice of a woman who had processed too many disputes between adults who should have known better. I sent her the permit packet, photographs, and one paragraph explaining that a sign generally needs words, symbols, logos, lights, advertising, or at least some faint relationship to communication. My wall had none of that. It was just blass. 4 days later, the complaint was closed. Evelyn's second complaint was about property values. She mailed a letter to every homeowner saying my project could reduce nearby home prices by up to 18%, a number she appeared to have pulled from the same magical place where she kept her measurements. That one almost made me laugh until Mrs. Alvarez showed up at my door holding the letter with both hands, worried sick because her house was her retirement plan. That was when it stopped being funny. I paid a certified appraiser named Helen Carver to review the project, the permits, the market, and comparable sales. Helen wrote 2 pages stating there was no support whatsoever for Evelyn's claim and that the studio and architectural glass feature would likely increase my parcel value, not decrease the neighborhoods. I brought that letter to the next board meeting. I also brought Nolan, who sat beside me with a yellow legal pad, looking polite in the way a snake might look polite before it remembers it has teeth. Evelyn came prepared with photos, dramatic angles, phrases like visual assault and community destabilization. And I will admit, she had a gift for making a wall sound like it had committed a felony. When she finished, Dana Lou asked if I had a response. I slid Helen's letter across the table, then said the State Consumer Protection Office had received a documented complaint regarding selective HOA enforcement in Ashford Oaks, including 6 years of West Side fines, ignored East Side violations, and the confirmed encroachment of unauthorized stone structures into common easement property. The room went quiet in that beautiful way rooms do when everyone hears a door close somewhere behind the person who thought they still had the key. Martin Shaw stared at the table. Dana read the first page carefully. Evelyn said, "You are trying to humiliate me." I said, "No, Mom. I'm trying to make the rules apply in both directions." She did not like that. People who use rules as weapons usually hate discovering they have sharp edges on both sides. After that, Evelyn got mean in the old-fashioned way. She started telling people at the mailbox kiosk that I had built the studio to spy on her. She told the pastor's wife I had a history of threatening neighbors. She told a township committee member I had been investigated for fraud in my plumbing business, which was so false it almost sounded expensive. 2 people told me directly. Dana texted me and said she was documenting what she heard because the board did not endorse personal attacks. I did not confront Evelyn. I did not post online. I did not shout across Laurel Pike, though I had a few speeches ready in my head while brushing my teeth. Nolan simply opened another folder. Dates, witnesses, statements, context. The funny thing about silence is people mistake it for weakness right up until they see the paperwork it was collecting. By February, the studio had its first tenant, a portrait photographer named Miles Grant, quiet guy. Steady hands mostly shot families, local businesses, and senior pictures. He moved in on a Saturday morning, hung black and white prints along the interior wall, and by sunset the whole studio glowed like a lantern. From the road, you could see art through the glass. From Evelyn's kitchen, she could see customers walking in, kids laughing during photo sessions, brides adjusting veils, people using that space like it belonged in the neighborhood because it did. The annual HOA meeting came 3 weeks later at the Briar Glen Library. Usually, maybe 25 people came, mostly for the budget sheet and free cookies. That night, there were nearly 90. People stood along the back wall. The local paper sent a reporter. A woman from the State Consumer Protection Office sat near the door in a navy blazer, saying almost nothing, which somehow made her the loudest person in the room. And at the front table, Dana Lou sat in the center chair. Not Evelyn, Dana. It turned out the board had held a special session after the easement letter, and Evelyn had been removed as acting president pending review. She was still there, seated stiffly to the side. Pearls on, jaw tight, hands folded like she was trying to hold herself together by force. Dana opened with budgets, drainage, snow removal, normal neighborhood business. Then she moved to enforcement practices. She put up a simple map showing 6 years of HOA violations. The west side of Laurel Pike was covered in red marks. The east side was almost blank. No drama, no insults, just data. Then she described the unauthorized stone lines in the common easement, the surveyor's confirmation, and the board vote requiring removal within 30 days. One board member had voted against enforcement, Dana said, despite having a direct personal interest in the affected property. Nobody needed her to say Evelyn's name. The room already knew. Evelyn stood and tried to speak over the murmurs. She said she had only protected the character of Ashford Oaks, that some homeowners wanted standards while others wanted chaos, and then she looked right at me and said my wall was an act of aggression disguised as architecture. Before I could even breathe, Mrs. Alvarez stood up. She held the warning letter she had gotten for trash cans after working a 12-hour night shift at the hospital. Then the retired machinist stood with his camper fine. Then the young couple from Kentucky stood with photos of the East Side violations that had never been touched. One after another, people had been quiet for years, finally had a room where quiet no longer served anybody. I sat there listening, not victorious exactly, not even happy in the simple way I expected. What I felt was heavier than that. I thought about my father at that kitchen table years ago, swallowing humiliation because he did not think he had another option. I thought about how many people pay fines, accept insults, and call it peace because they are too tired to fight the machine. And I thought, sometimes the machine is not even that strong. Sometimes it is just one person with a clipboard, depending on everyone else to stay tired. Evelyn resigned 6 weeks later for personal reasons. The stone lions were removed in March. The state review ended with a binding agreement requiring Ashford Oaks to create written enforcement standards, a real appeal process, public violation logs, conflict of interest rules, and a review of past fines. Mrs. Alvarez got her money back, so did 8 other West Side families. Dana was elected president by a margin that made the result feel less like an election and more like a neighborhood exhale. Miles renewed his studio lease before summer and started calling the afternoon life the Laurel Bounce, like it was some famous thing instead of sunlight bouncing off a spiked wall built by a plumber who got mad enough to read the fine print. In July, we had a Brock cookout on the west side. Kids ran through sprinklers, somebody smoked ribs. Mrs. Alvarez made lemonade strong enough to qualify as medicine, and just before dark, the ridge turned gold behind the glass. Miles took a photo of all of us reflected in the wall, neighbors standing together where years before most of us had only waved from driveways. He framed it and hung it inside the studio, facing the road. Evelyn can see it from her kitchen as she opens the curtains. Maybe that is petty. Maybe it is justice. Maybe it is both. So let me ask you, if someone in power twists the rules just because they think nobody will push back, is it wrong to use those same rules to stop them? Or is that exactly what fairness looks like when it finally grows teeth? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me if Caleb went too far or not far enough, and if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, a board, or some self-appointed ruler with a clipboard. Share your story, because somebody watching this may be one paragraph away from realizing they are not helpless. Like the video, send it to the friend who needs to read the fine print, and subscribe, because around here, petty power only works until regular people start keeping receipts.